Alright, let's sing out the first verse. Sublime gracia del Señor, que a mi pecador salvó. Fui ciego, mas hoy miro yo, perdido y me amó. En los peligros aflicción que yo he tenido aquí, su gracia siempre me libró y me guiará feliz. Su gracia me enseñó también mis dudas ya inventó. Oh, cuán precioso fue a mi ser al dar mi corazón. Y cuando el cielo por siglos mil, brillando ese pasó, yo cantaré por siempre ahí su amor que me salvó. John 6:47, de cierto os digo, el que cree en mí tiene vida eterna. So de cierto is, again, idiomatic. In the King James Version of the Bible says, verily, verily, I say it unto you. This is de cierto, kind of like of a certainty, basically the same thing as verily. De cierto, os digo. Digo means I say, and os is meaning to you, basically I say to you. El, he, que cree, that believeth, en me, tiene vida eterna, had everlasting life, right? Has life everlasting. So let's say it together as a class. De cierto os digo, el que cree en mí, tiene vida eterna. So that's a great salvation verse right there, John 6:47. And let's go through our vocabulary list. Today, we're going to be learning about how to conjugate ER and IR verbs. If you remember the last few weeks, we've been conjugating verbs that end in the letters AR. And so let's read down the list here, then we're going to conjugate these. But the first verb is comer, which means to eat. Creer, and be sure to pronounce those E's separately. Creer means to believe. Vivir means to live. Abrir means to open. Comprender means to understand, as in comprehend. Hacer means to make or to do. Traer, again, not a diphthong. You pronounce each letter separately there. Traer, to carry. Conocer, to know as in to be familiar with something. Saber means to know as in information. And ver means to see. Now let me explain to you the difference between conocer and saber. Conocer would be as in, I know Garrett, he's a friend of mine. That means I'm familiar with him, I'm aware of him, I know Garrett, okay? But if I were to ask you, who in here knows what is the capital of Arizona? If you know that, that would be saber. Yes, I know that the capital of Arizona is Phoenix, and so on. So to know information, to know facts would be saber, to know something to be the case. And then conocer would be, I'm familiar with it. I know, hey, do you know this part of town? Would be conocer. Do you know this area? Do you know this person? And so forth. So that's what conocer means versus saber. And then ver means to see. Now, today we're going to be conjugating typical ER and IR verbs because there are exceptions to all of these. But let's do a quick review of the AR verbs. If you remember, we'll draw our same chart that we draw every week for the verbs. This is singular, this is plural, and this is first person, second person, third person. First person is when I'm talking about myself, second person is when I'm talking to you, third person is when I'm talking about someone else, okay? And of course the pronouns here in Spanish, yo means I, Tu with an accent mark means you in a familiar sense. And then él means he. Ella means she. And then let's throw in usted, which is the formal way of saying you. That falls under the third person singular. Okay, and then up here we've got nosotros, which is we. We're not learning this one because it's not used in our part of the world. And then this one down here would be ustedes, the plural you form, which in this part of the world, California, Arizona, Mexico, this is what they use to talk to a group of people, even if they're familiar. They don't go to a familiar plural, they pretty much just use ustedes, even if it's their friends or a close family. And then this could also be ellos, which would be as in they, and then ellas, which would be they if everyone that we're talking about is female, okay? Now, when we conjugated the AR verbs, if you remember, we basically took the verb, and let's say we were using the verb llamar, which means to call. We took it and we divided it into the stem and the ending, right? And we draw a line right there and isolate that AR, and we're left with this stem here, yam, right? And then we added various endings. O in the first person, as, a, amos, y an, okay? Right? So if we were doing llamar, it would be llamo, llamas, llama, llamamos, llama. Okay, everybody got that? Now, conjugating ER verbs and IR verbs is going to be very similar. Although, unfortunately, these verbs have a little bit more exceptions than the AR verbs usually. The only difference here that we're going to make is basically with the ER verbs, and really the good thing is that the ER and the IR verbs pretty much follow a similar pattern, okay? This is going to become, instead of amos, it's going to become amos. With IR verbs, it's going to become emos, okay? So that part's pretty easy, right? Then on the first person, nothing's really going to change. Second person is going to become ace instead of us. Third person is going to become a instead of a. So you can see that it's pretty easy. It's pretty close to the same as the AR verbs. And then this becomes ein instead of an. Okay? So that's our pattern with the ER and the IR verbs. The only one that's really different between the ER and the IR verbs is this one right here, the nosotros form. The rest of them are all going to get the ace, a, and ein, and the o. That's the only one where it's different right there. Okay? So really, this isn't much different from the AR verbs. So let's go ahead and try an example. Somebody call out to me, what's the first verb on that list?
Comer.
Comer, okay, to eat. So that's an ER verb. So, we're going to first take our verb, right? Comer. We're going to separate it out into the stem and the ending, right there, okay? That leaves us with this stem, com, and then we're going to throw our endings on. Okay, what's the first one going to be? Como, right? That means I eat. What's this one going to be? Comes. Be sure to put the accent on the first syllable. Comes. Means you eat in a familiar sense. Come. So that would be usted come if we were speaking formally to someone in the second person. Or that could be él come, he is eating. Or ella come, she eats. Now this one, which one are we going to choose? Amos or emos? It's an ER verb. So it's going to be comemos. Right? Skip this one, and this one's going to be comen. Now, where's the accent falling? Remember our accent rules? If the word ends at a vowel, an N or an S, it goes on the second to last. So it'd be como, comes, come. This one's a little tricky. Comemos, right? Because we added on 2 syllables. Comemos, come. Okay? So now, what's the next one on the list? Creer, same thing. We're going to draw our chart. We're going to write down our infinitive, which is creer. We're going to break it down by separating out the ER, which leaves us with the stem of cre and all our different slots here. Okay, and then what's this one going to be right here? Creo means what? I believe. Crees, cree, creemos, cree. Now in the Bible, I've seen it written like this, and because the Bible was translated a long time ago, I've actually seen it written with a Y like this, just to emphasize the separate syllables, but it pretty much follows the same pattern. Creo, crees, cree, creemos, creen. Okay? What's the next verb on the list?
Vivir.
What is it?
Vivir.
Vivir, okay? So let me erase these two. Alright, so we got our endings here. Now this is our first IR verbs. The other ones we've been doing have been ER verbs. But it's going to follow the same pattern except in the nosotros form. So this is vivir. We're going to break down the stem right there, right? And the first person is going to be what? Vivo. What's this one going to be? Not, yeah, exactly. Vives. Okay? It still gets an ES even though it's an IR verb. Vives. Vive. Okay? And then, remember this one's a little tricky. What's this one going to be? Vivimos. That's the only one where there's any difference between the ER and the IR verbs, is in the first person plural. So, vivimos and viven. Alright, so this means I live, you live, he lives, él vive. Or if I wanted to say you formal, I'd say usted vive. Vivimos means we live. And viven means they live. So what does this word mean, vivir? To live, okay? So what's the next one on the list? Abrir, okay, that means to open. So we're going to draw our chart again. We got our singular side of the chart, and we've got our plural side of the chart, right? We're going to take our infinitive, abrir. We're going to separate the last two letters from it. And that leaves us with the stem of ABR. So we'll go ahead and write that down first of all. And then what are we gonna add in the first person? Abres. All right, got it? So now let's skip comprender, because it just follows the same pattern. That would be, well, let's just say it together as a class. If we're understanding the pattern here, let's just go through. What would it be? It would be comprendo, comprendes, comprende, comprendemos, comprenden. Okay, if we add those same endings. Now, the next five on the list are irregular only in the first person singular. Okay, the rest of them are going to follow the same pattern. So, let's start with the first one, a very, very common word, which is hacer. Okay? Hacer means to do, and it can also mean to make. Okay? So, we're left with this stem right here, HAC. Alright? So, we're going to come back to the first person, because notice down at the very bottom of your handout, the little star says irregular in the first person singular. Okay? We're going to do the second person singular, which would be haces, right? Which would be you make or you do. Hace, hacemos, and hacen. So look, we're basically just throwing the same old endings on. It's really pretty much like the AR verbs. We just take the stem and then throw these endings on. Now, in the first person, it's irregular. The C basically becomes a G. And a lot of ER and IR verbs pick up a G in their first person singular. So this one, instead of being, you say, well, why did they change it? Well, because if we followed the same pattern, that would be what? Haco. Or not Haco, Aco. It would be Aco, because the H is not pronounced. And see, here's the thing. C's in Spanish make a different sound in front of A's and O's as they do in front of E, I, and U. Remember that? I'm sorry, A, O, and U makes a hard sound, and E and I is the soft vowel sound. And so, basically, this would be ACO. ACO, ACES, and so that doesn't work. So, this actually just becomes AGO in the first person. So, I do or I make is AGO. So, it's AGO, ACES, ACE, hacemos, hacen. Okay? Let's look at the next irregular one. Traer. So, we're going to go ahead and start out by writing out our infinitive, which would be traer. And don't let it bother you that these, and by the way, whenever you have verbs that have a dual vowel, it's never a diphthong. These are separately pronounced, just like with creer, traer. So we're going to go ahead and separate out the ER, okay? There's our stem. Let's draw our chart. And we'll skip the first person for now. This will be traes, right? Because we're basically starting with the same thing, the tra. This is going to be what? Trae, traemos, traen, okay? And then in the first person singular, again, you just have to memorize. That's why I wrote them out at the bottom, those 5 words. You just have to memorize these irregular first persons. This one's going to be traigo. I bring or I carry, right? Traigo. So, what's the next one on the list? Call it out to me, somebody. Conocer, okay? So, here's our infinitive. Whoops. Conocer. We're going to take off the ER to get our stem, which leaves us with this stem right here. Conos. Okay? This one's going to be conoces. Remember to get your accent on the second to last syllable on these. Conoces, conoce, conocemos. And what's this one going to be? Somebody call it out loudly and with the right accent. No, not conocen. It's conocen, right? Everybody say it as a class. Conocen. Okay, let's say all these. Conoces, conoce, conocemos, conocen. Okay? So you got to get the accent in the right place, second to last syllable. This one is going to be irregular. Instead of being, conozco, okay, it basically picks up an S and becomes conozco. Conozco means I know. But it doesn't mean I know as in to know a fact or to know information. It means I know as in I know Brother Dave. I know Tempe, Arizona. I know, like I'm familiar with it. Whereas saber would mean I know information, I know facts. Okay? So what's the next one on the list? Saber, right?
Yep.
Okay? So, saber is going to be the same thing. I'm going to split it up right there. Stem and ending. And then let's switch to the color red. And we're going to do this first. What's the ending going to be? Sabes. Sabe. So what would it mean if I said él sabe?
He knows.
He knows, right? He knows some kind of a fact. This one's going to be what? Sabemos. And this one's going to be what? Saben. Saben. Okay? Now, in the first person, it's going to be irregular. It's just going to be simply, doesn't matter why, you just have to memorize it. So, you'll hear a lot of people say this, no sé. Have you ever heard that expression in Spanish? People will say this a lot. Just as a complete sentence, no sé. It means what? I don't know, right? You're going to say that a lot. People ask you a question, no sé. Or sometimes you'll hear people say, yo no sé. I don't know. If they want to emphasize themselves, they say, yo no sé. Or you could say, yo sé means I know. Okay? So that one, same pattern, same pattern, same pattern, same pattern. This is the only irregularity. With all these 5, that's the case. So you're going to want to practice these throughout the week, conjugating these 10 verbs that we're learning. What's the next one? Ver. Okay, this is one that you're going to be using a lot, to see. So if we break this one down according to rule, basically we're left with just a V only, okay? So we're going to skip the first person. Base, right? Because what's our ending? ES, we're throwing it on the V, so this one does follow the pattern. Ves, ve, vemos. What does vemos mean? We see. Okay, vemos and ve. And then in the first person, we're basically just adding an E is all. It's just veo. Not a diphthong, just veo. Okay? So veo means I see, veo, ves, ve, vemos, ven. Okay, does anybody have any questions about that? Pretty easy? So really there's very little difference between conjugating ER verbs and conjugating AR verbs. The biggest thing that you're going to need to remember with this, because I'll draw this right here, these are our endings in the AR form. Really all you're doing, the O is always the same. And really all you're doing is just changing as to ace, a to a, amos to amos, or emos. And this is the part that might throw you off right here, is to remember that everything gets an E. If it's an ER verb or an IR verb, it's still going to be ace, a, and aim. The only one where we're going to differentiate is in the first person plural, when we go between amos and emos and amos. Okay? So really we haven't really learned that much new today, right? Because we just learned how to adapt this chart over to the ER and IR verbs. And really every verb in Spanish is going to be one of those three in its infinitive form. It's either going to end in an AR, an ER, or an IR, every single verb. So now that you know how to conjugate these, you can pretty much conjugate any verb. Now, there are exceptions, of course. And a lot of the exceptions are just going to have to be memorized. You're just going to have to learn, like these 5 that have a different first person. But the 10 verbs I chose for you are 10 verbs that you're going to be using a lot. They're very commonly used, and they follow the rules. They follow the pattern, which makes it pretty easy. Except for the last 5, you only have to memorize one additional form. And you just have to do memorization on this. I mean, they don't follow a pattern, that's why they're irregular. Now, let me show you 2, just because we have a little time. I'm going to show you 2, and you don't have to learn this. Basically, just mainly you need to learn what's on the sheet, but I'm going to show you 2 very commonly used irregular verbs. Remember how when we learned about AR verbs, we learned the verb mostrar? You remember that? And it was basically following the same pattern, except it had a stem change. Okay? And those of you that are beginners can maybe just tune out as part of the lesson. Okay, so that's our typical stem right there, okay? And if you remember in the first person singular, this is going back a few weeks, it stayed the same. Mostramos. But in every other form, it had a little bit of a stem change. Basically what happened, the O became an UE. Okay? And so we basically had muestro, muestras, muestra, and muestra. Okay? And again, you know, if this is complicating things for you, don't worry about it. Well, there are ER and IR verbs that also undergo a stem change, and here are 2 that you're going to end up using a lot. Okay? One of them is tener. Okay, and these follow a similar pattern with each other. One of them is tener, and the other one is venir. Okay? Now, tener means to have. So that's a pretty common word. And then venir means to come. Okay? So in order to conjugate these, there's going to be a little bit of a stem change. Okay? And that stem change is that the E is going to become IE. Okay? So with tener, we're going to start with this kind of a stem. We're just adding an I basically to the stem. But remember, just as with mostrar, the stem change did not affect the first person plural. Same thing. This is going to stick with the same old pattern. Tenemos. Right? We have. Okay? But we have this stem change going on. So what's this going to be, do you think? Tienes. You have. Right? Tiene. He has. Or usted tiene. Tenemos. We have. And ellos tienen. Okay? Now, with the first person, singular, it's going to undergo a similar thing to what hacer, traer, conocer, right? It's basically going to pick up a G. Instead of going through this stem change, it's going to pick up a G. Tango. I have. Okay? And again, if you're a beginner, just remember what we talked about earlier. But this is for those who are a little more advanced. And we'll learn this later as a class, too. We'll go into more of these stem changes. But now let's do venir. It's going to be pretty much the same pattern. Okay? The E becomes IE. And so, not in the first person though, right? So this is just going to be plain old venimos. Why imos? because it's an IR verb, right? Venimos, we come. This one's going to go through the typical stem change. The E to IE. Okay, so this will be vienes, you come. Viene, he comes. Vienen, they come. Okay? And then this is going to be exactly like tener in the first person. Vengo. Right? I come, vengo. I have, tengo. Okay? So, the reason that I went into that is just to give you a little bit more to chew on, because the ER and IR verbs are so easy. If you've been with us the last few weeks and you've been learning all these AR verbs, we really didn't learn hardly anything new today. And so, for those who've been with us in the previous weeks, that'll give you a little bit more to chew on. Basically just learning how these two verbs work, tener and venir. Does anybody have any questions about the ER and IR verbs? Okay. On the endings, who can tell me what is the one form where the ER verbs differ from the IR verbs in their ending? Which form is that? The we form, right? Nosotros. Because there's a difference between amos and imos. Everywhere else they get the same ending. The o, the es, the a, the aim. Okay? So that's the one place that they're different, right? Okay, let me ask you this. What is the last form that ever goes through an irregularity in Spanish? I mean, this, out of the 5 forms we're learning, you know, the I, the you, the he, the we, and the they, okay? Which one is the one that pretty much always follows the rules, no matter what verb you're using? Which form is it? Is it the yo, the tú, the él, the nosotros, or the ustedes, or the ellos form? Which one? Which is that one that just always, I mean, it just goes with the stem every time? That's the we form, remember? Because even on these irregular verbs, it's still tenemos, vivimos, right? Mostramos. These never change. That's the one that's the easiest one to do, because you always just drop that AR and you pretty much just throw on amos, amos, or emos, right? So if you're not very good at Spanish, you're not very good at conjugating verbs, you can just speak like, you know, the Queen of England all the time and just use the we form every time, right? So you can refer to yourself as a plural, as a we. So, anyways, anybody have any questions about that? Make sense to everybody? All right, let's go ahead and sing our song one more time. We're going to sing Amazing Grace. All right, let's sing it on the first verse. Sublime